The wind howled like something alive, tearing through the snow-heavy pines of the Bitterroot Mountains. On a night like this, most sane people hunkered down and let the world rage outside. Elena Rivera was not most people. She pressed her palm against the cold windowpane, watching as the blizzard smothered everything in sight, erasing the world she'd come to both dread and love. Her cabin, tucked against a ridge and surrounded by endless forest, was a sanctuary and a prison. The isolation had kept her safe, safe from the noise, safe from her past, safe from anyone who might try to remind her of who she'd been before. But tonight, the wildness outside felt different. The storm wasn't just a backdrop, it felt like a living thing pressing in on our walls, whispering that something was coming. Elena was settling in for another sleepless night, reading old emails, checking her battered Nikon, even though she hadn't snapped a picture in months, when she heard it. At first, it was just a tremor beneath the wind, a sound so strange that she thought she'd imagined it. Then it came again, clear and sharp, a whinny, high, and desperate, cutting through the storm. She froze. Horses? Out here? No one kept livestock this high up the pass. For a heartbeat, she wondered if she was hallucinating. Cabin fever. The brain-inventing company in the empty dark. But then the cry came once more. And this time it was closer. Elena grabbed her flashlight and shrugged on her thick parka, the one she'd worn on freezing Afghan nights when the bullets felt colder than the wind. As she opened the front door, the blizzard hit her full in the face, a wall of snow and ice that stole her breath and clawed at her eyes. But she forced herself out, letting the beam of her flashlight cut a wavering path through the swirl. Her boots crunched over the thick drifts as she moved away from the cabin, adrenaline fighting back the sting of the cold. She called out, her voice barely audible above the wind. "Hello? Someone out there?" No answer, but there. A flash of movement, a shadow against the white. She followed it, ducking under the eaves of a twisted pine, heart thumping hard enough to hurt. The wind screamed, and for a moment she almost turned back. But then she saw them. A small horse, a yearling no bigger than a large dog, its coat mottled gray and its sides heaving with each labored breath, stood shivering in the snow. Next to it, half shrouded in darkness, was a black mare. The mare stood utterly still, her mane whipping around her face, her body angled protectively between the yearling and the storm. Elena's breath caught. She had seen wild horses before, ghost shapes at the edge of the forest, always vanishing before she could get close. But this was different. The yearling was wounded, blood dark against the snow on its foreleg, and its eyes rolled white with fear and exhaustion. Yet the mare made no move to run. She didn't charge or snort in warning. She simply watched, her gaze fixed on Elena, deep and unblinking. Elena crouched slowly, arms outstretched, speaking in the soft, low voice she'd once used to comfort frightened children in war zones. "Hey. Hey there. It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." The mare's ears flicked, but she didn't back away. The yearling took a stumbling step forward, then almost collapsed, legs shaking. Elena's instinct kicked in. She edged closer, never breaking eye contact with the mare. The snow came down in thick, suffocating sheets, soaking through her gloves, but she didn't dare look away or move too fast. "Easy, girl," she murmured, directing her words to the mare as much as the foal. "I want to help." When she was close enough, she saw just how bad the yearling's leg was. A jagged gash, probably from barbed wire or a sharp branch, rimmed with ice and crusted blood. If she didn't act now, the foal wouldn't survive the night. Elena made a decision, fast and desperate. She had to get them to shelter. She rose slowly and stepped backward, gesturing toward the detached garage a few yards from her cabin. The yearling whickered softly, then stumbled after her. The mare, to Elena's astonishment, followed, keeping her distance, but never letting Elena out of her sight. Inside the garage, the air was only a little warmer than outside, but it was dry and out of the wind. Elena flicked on the old shop light, sending harsh shadows skittering over the concrete floor. The yearling hesitated at the threshold, nostrils flaring at the unfamiliar smells, but Elena coaxed him in with soft words and the promise of safety. The mare came last, her hooves clopping against the floor as she slipped inside. When Elena swung the door closed, the mare flinched. Her muscles tensed, and for a split second Elena thought she might bolt or attack, but instead she just stood there, sides heaving, watching Elena with that same intense, watchful gaze. She didn't run, she didn't charge, she waited. The realization shook Elena. The trust it implied, the silent agreement between woman and horse, two creatures battered by the storm, both having lost their place in the world. It was a fragile peace, and Elena knew it could shatter in an instant. But for now, they were together. Three souls sheltering from the blizzard, each in their own kind of pain. Elena went to work, falling back on the instincts that had kept her alive in places where chaos was the only constant. She retrieved her old trauma field kit, a battered green pouch she hadn't opened in years. "Funny," she whispered, glancing at the horses. "The same supplies I used to save soldiers. Now for a foal I'd never met." Kneeling beside the yearling, Elena worked quickly. She cleaned the wound with antiseptic, the foal trembling but too exhausted to protest. She wrapped the leg in thermal gauze and secured it with tape, all the while murmuring encouragement. The mare edged closer, eyes wide but not angry, as if she understood what Elena was doing. When the worst of the work was done, Elena stood and backed away, giving the horses space. The garage filled with the sound of their breathing and the muted howl of the storm beyond. She sank onto an old wooden stool, shaking from cold and adrenaline, her mind spinning with questions. Why were they here? What had driven them down the mountain through a storm like this? Where was their herd? And what exactly had made the mare trust her just enough to step into the unknown? She didn't have answers. Not yet. But as the storm raged on outside, Elena realized she was no longer alone in her exile. Something had found her in the blizzard, a cry, a whinny, a wild hope, and whatever happened next, nothing in her life would ever be quite the same. Before she became the woman who braved a blizzard for 2 wild mustangs, Elena Rivera was known for running toward chaos, not from it. Years ago, her name would show up in the bylines of international newspapers, sometimes under grainy black and white shots of children clutching their mothers, or soldiers ducking for cover as tracer rounds carved up the night. She was the woman with the camera, who always got too close, always found a way to blend into the shadows, until she couldn't. The world inside Elena's cabin that night was tiny, a safe cocoon carved out by wood smoke and routine. But as she sat shivering in the garage after tending the yearling's wound, the silence pressed memories up from the depths, making her remember things she'd spent years trying to forget. She stared at the mare, at the mud and ice crusting her black coat, the wild tension in her stance, and she saw herself, years ago, in another kind of storm. Back then, Elena had never planned to disappear. She'd chased stories across continents, Bosnia, Gaza, Aleppo. She remembered the sound of helicopters rattling window panes, the feel of dust grinding between her teeth, the adrenaline that came with the first snap of gunfire. She remembered a time when nothing frightened her, not even her own ghosts. It was the last assignment that broke her. She'd been embedded with a medical team outside Kabul. She was supposed to be there to document the lives of children in war zones, show the world what happened when the headlines faded and the aid convoys moved on. She'd grown used to pain, learned to harden herself against it. But one afternoon, as the light faded and the air turned cold, she'd watched a little girl die in front of her. Elena could still see the girl's face, dusty, streaked with tears, a ragged doll clutched in one hand. She'd knelt beside her, camera forgotten, trying to stop the blood with her own hands, shouting for a medic who never came. The girl's eyes had found hers, pleading, and then nothing. The world just went quiet. After that, Elena put her camera away. She left her job, left her city, left her friends, and her family. She bought a map and let her finger drift over mountain ranges until it stopped at the jagged green ridges of Montana. The Bitterroot Valley was the last place anyone would look for a woman who used to chase wars. She found a rundown cabin for sale on a forgotten dirt road. It had no neighbors, no cell signal, and for the first 6 months, no real heat. That suited Elena fine. She needed silence, needed to become invisible, needed, most of all, to stop caring. But as the snow piled up outside and the wild horses shivered in her garage, Elena felt the weight of all those old memories pressing in. The girl she couldn't save, the life she'd walked away from. The camera gathering dust in her bedroom closet, lens cap never removed. She looked at the mare again. Even exhausted, the animal was magnificent. Her muscles tense beneath the battered coat, her mane tangled and streaked with frost. Elena wondered if the horse had lost someone too. Wild herds looked after their own, but sometimes a foal would be orphaned and the lead mare would try to protect it. Sometimes she'd succeed. Sometimes she'd just end up with another wound. The yearling whimpered, shifting its weight as pain lanced through its injured leg. The mare stepped closer, nuzzling the foal's shoulder, her body angled between Elena and the wounded animal. It was a stance Elena recognized, protective, fierce, a line drawn in the snow. The mare was making herself a shield. She was daring the world to try and take something else from her. Elena swallowed, the taste of old guilt thick in her mouth. She was supposed to have stopped feeling things like this. She was supposed to have left the world behind. But the look in the mare's eyes, dark, wild, alive, said something different. It reminded Elena of herself at the edge of every war zone, exhausted, battered, but still refusing to give in. Outside, the blizzard raged on. The wind rattled the garage door, and snow seeped through the cracks, cold as regret. Elena rubbed her gloved hands together, trying to summon a little warmth. She looked at her watch. Only 20 minutes had passed since she'd led the horses inside, but it felt like a lifetime. She knew she couldn't leave them here all night. The garage was cold, barely above freezing. She stood and moved quietly to the small storeroom at the back, rummaging through boxes until she found an old wool blanket and a salt block left by the previous owner. She scattered a little grain from the emergency stash she kept for the odd lost elk. The mare eyed her warily, but as soon as Elena retreated to her stool, she moved forward, snorting softly at the salt and grain. It was a small gesture, but it felt like an agreement. You can stay. For now. Elena took out her phone, knowing she wouldn't get a signal, and opened her notes app. She began typing, the words coming slow and halting at first. Found 2 horses, 1 wounded. Storm still getting worse. No way to reach help until morning. She stopped, backspaced, and started again. There's a black mare. She's different. Brave. The foal's hurt bad, but she won't leave him. Reminds me of... She hesitated, her thumb hovering over the screen, and finally just typed, reminds me of me. She didn't send the message, just let the words hang there in the blue light of her phone before tucking it back in her coat. The minutes dragged by. The yearling slept, his head drooping, sides rising and falling with shallow, pained breaths. The mare stayed close, always between the foal and the door, never taking her eyes off Elena. For her part, Elena just watched, unable to help any further, but unable to leave. She thought of her camera, still gathering dust in the closet. She'd sworn never to pick it up again. But some part of her itched to document this night, to capture the raw, honest connection between these 2 wild animals, the way the storm seemed to throw them together and test their trust. Maybe tomorrow, she thought, if they survived the night. As midnight bled into morning, Elena realized she was no longer thinking about herself. The horses were the only thing that mattered. Their survival, their trust, their pain. She felt the first stirrings of something she thought lost forever. Purpose. The desire to save, to protect, to witness. For years, Ashen had lived with walls around her heart, thick as the snow outside her cabin. But now, in the hush of the garage, with a wild mare and a wounded foal watching her through the storm. She realized those walls had begun to crack, and through the cracks, something warm and alive was fighting to come back. The storm didn't let up. If anything, the night deepened, pressing in with a ferocity that made the cabin and its detached garage feel like the last islands of warmth on Earth. Elena didn't sleep. She kept moving between her kitchen and the garage, hands shaking from cold and nerves, mind racing with what to do next. With every trip, she could feel the fatigue clawing at her, but she refused to rest while the 2 wild horses were under her roof. The yearling was the priority. Its wound was deep and ugly, too much for someone with only field training, but Elena knew enough to keep it from getting worse. She knelt beside the young horse again, the trauma kit open on the garage floor. The air smelled of antiseptic and snow-soaked fur. She cleaned the wound for a second time, her hands working automatically, every motion slow and gentle. The foal whimpered once, but didn't try to fight her. It was too tired, too cold, and perhaps already learning that she meant no harm. All the while, the black mare stood guard, her massive body between Elena and the foal. She didn't snarl or lash out, but Elena could feel the tension in her muscles, a coiled spring, always ready to explode if something went wrong. Yet the mare did not bolt, and Elena marveled at the trust, or was it desperate hope, that kept the animal in place. After cleaning and rewrapping the injury, Elena stepped back and watched the mare inch closer to the foal. The mare sniffed at the wound, and then, almost ritualistically, nuzzled the yearling's neck. Elena felt a pang of something deep and old inside her, a memory of holding her little brother after he scraped his knee as a child, of being the protector, the one who made things right. The garage was freezing, even with the old space heater humming away in the corner, but it was better than the open night. Elena knew it couldn't last. Her horses weren't meant to be indoors, and these 2 were wild, their instincts telling them to run, to find open ground and freedom, but the storm had them trapped, and, in a way, had trapped Elena with them. As the hours dragged on, she did her best to make the space less frightening. She scattered more grain and checked the water bucket, then dragged in a couple of old horse blankets she found rolled up in the barn from the cabin's previous owner. The mare eyed her warily, but didn't attack. If anything, as Elena moved around, she saw something change in the horse's gaze, a subtle shift from outright suspicion to the kind of wary patience you see in creatures that have survived too much. Finally, with the animals as settled as they could be, Elena slumped onto a stack of firewood near the door, wrapping her arms around her knees and letting the fatigue wash over her. She looked at her watch. Nearly 4 a.m., the blizzard still howled. For a long time, the only sounds were the soft breathing of the horses and the wind outside. Elena's thoughts drifted. She remembered other nights like this. Nights spent in battered tents or makeshift shelters in war zones, waiting for dawn and hoping for a lull in the chaos. It was strange, the ways life repeated itself, the way she always seemed to end up in the eye of some storm, fighting to protect what little she could. At some point she must have dozed off because the next thing she knew, a shaft of gray light was filtering through the garage window. The storm had not stopped, but it had softened. The snow now fell in thick, lazy flakes. Elena blinked the sleep from her eyes, groaning as she stretched her aching limbs. The horses were awake too. The yearling looked a little steadier, standing on 3 legs but managing not to collapse. The mare, still as a statue, watched Elena rise. "Hey there," Elena murmured, her voice hoarse from the cold. Still with me, huh?" She approached slowly, palms open, moving the way she'd learned to in dangerous places, never making sudden moves, never giving anyone a reason to panic. The mare didn't shy away. In fact, as Elena knelt beside the foal, the mare stepped a fraction closer, as if to oversee her work. Elena smiled. "We're a team now, huh? You keep him calm, I keep him patched up." She checked the wound, pleased to see that the bleeding had stopped and the swelling wasn't any worse. She changed the dressing and gently stroked the foal's forehead. Its eyes fluttered shut for a moment, trusting her touch. She realized then that she was humming a lullaby her mother used to sing, when Elena was small. She caught herself and stopped, embarrassed. But the horses didn't seem to mind. Later, she brought food from the cabin, apples, carrots, the last of her oatmeal. The yearling accepted the pieces slowly, with hesitant, trembling bites. Elena laughed softly, relief breaking through her exhaustion. She found herself talking to them as she worked, narrating her actions, as if they were old friends or family. "It's just you and me and your mama against the world tonight," she whispered, offering another slice of apple. "We'll get through the storm. Promise?" The day crawled by. She returned to the cabin, only for coffee and a hot shower, then back to the garage. Each time, the mare grew more comfortable with her presence. Elena noticed the way the horse's body relaxed, the twitch of her ears when Elena spoke. At one point, the mare snorted and stamped, but didn't move away, even as Elena wiped down the yearling's leg with a fresh cloth. At sunset, Elena fetched her old camera from the closet. She stood in the doorway, hesitating, memories pressing in. She hadn't picked it up in so long that it felt foreign in her hands. She told herself she was just documenting the horse's condition. Proof for the vet, if she ever reached one. But as she raised the camera and framed the shot, the yearling leaning against the mare, snowflakes catching in their manes, she felt something stir, a flicker of the old passion, the one that had taken her to so many dangerous places. She took a picture, the shutter echoing in the silent garage. Then another. She moved quietly, not wanting to spook the animals, and for the first time in years, she let herself feel the connection, the silent trust between her and the wild horses. Night fell again, and the blizzard thickened. Elena wrapped herself in an old sleeping bag and settled on the garage floor. Just before she drifted off, she felt the mare's presence close by, a dark shape at the edge of her vision. Then, in the stillness, the mare stepped forward and rested her head on Elena's shoulder. Just for a moment. The weight was gentle, surprisingly warm. Elena didn't move, barely dared to breathe. In that instant, something inside her broke loose, something frozen and buried for too long. She blinked back tears, letting the warmth of the mare's touch thaw the part of her heart she thought she'd lost forever. But outside, the storm raged on. But inside the garage, 3 survivors sheltered together, each surrendering a little of their fear, each clinging to the fragile hope that morning would bring something better. By the second day, the storm had transformed the outside world into an endless white silence. The cabin, the detached garage, even the nearest trees. Everything was swallowed by snow and wind, horizons erased. The only sound was the low roar of the blizzard, and inside the garage, the steady breathing of 3 creatures sharing an improbable sanctuary. Elena hadn't planned on this. She never planned for anything anymore. For years, her life had been driven by schedules, deadlines, flights, and alarms, until she'd chosen to vanish. But now, trapped with 2 wild horses in the grip of a Montana winter, she felt a sense of purpose she hadn't known in ages. She woke to the sound of the mare pacing. A heavy, restless rhythm on the concrete. The yearling was still lying close to the wall, legs folded awkwardly beneath him, head drooping in exhaustion. Elena's own limbs were stiff and cold from sleeping in her makeshift nest on the floor, her back pressed to the toolbox and her camera beside her, tucked in a blanket to keep the battery from freezing. She moved slowly, careful not to startle the animals. The mare stopped pacing as soon as Elena stirred, her dark eyes tracking every move. Elena gave a soft greeting, just a whisper, "Good morning, beautiful. Still holding down the fort, huh?" There was no answer, of course, just a flick of the mare's ear, the barest hint of trust. Elena felt the weight of that gesture, as real as any spoken word. The first task was to check the yearling's wound. It looked better, less swollen, though angry and raw around the edges. Elena swapped out the old blood-stained gauze for fresh bandages, her hands gentle and deliberate. The yearling shivered but did not resist. The mare watched, tense but not intervening. Elena fetched a bucket of water, grateful she'd filled several before the pipes threatened to freeze. She offered it to the yearling, who drank eagerly, and then to the mare, who lapped at it with measured, regal movements. She went back to the cabin for food, apples and carrots chopped into small chunks, a few slices of bread, whatever she could spare. She'd never been so glad for the canned and dried supplies stacked in her pantry, bought in case she ever had to hole up during a storm. She never imagined she'd be sharing them with horses. The days blurred together. The snow never really stopped. It only shifted in its violence, sometimes a gentle dusting, sometimes blinding whiteout. There was no way to call for help. Her satellite phone lay useless in its cradle, the storm jamming every signal. Elena devoted herself to the animal's care. She fed the yearling by hand, encouraging him with quiet words, coaxing him to eat even when he seemed too weak. Sometimes he nibbled at her fingers, a little spark of playfulness breaking through his exhaustion. The mare stood guard, but there was no more fear in her movements, only watchfulness, a readiness to protect. At first, Elena told herself she was just filling the time, keeping busy until rescue came. But gradually, she began to document the horses, not out of routine, but because she wanted to remember. She dusted off her old Nikon, snapped photos of the mare's fierce stance, the yearling's sleepy eyes, the way the snow made halos around their dark forms. She kept a notebook, jotting down observations like a field scientist. Day 2, foal eating better. Mare lets me touch his shoulder now. Storm still hasn't let up. Feels like we're on another planet. She found comfort in these small rituals, the same way she'd once found comfort in her work, bearing witness even in the middle of chaos. The second night, Elena woke to the sound of hooves on concrete. The mare was restless, nudging the garage door as if testing its strength. Elena rose and spoke softly, reassuring her, letting her know that they were safe. She thought about what would happen when the storm broke, how she'd have to let them go, how they might vanish back into the wilderness as suddenly as they had appeared. But for now, they were all prisoners of the same winter, drawn together by necessity and something else, something Elena didn't dare name. On the third day, the wind eased. The world outside was a white desert, dunes of snow piling against the cabin walls, branches bowed under impossible weight. Elena sat with her back against the garage wall, camera in hand, notebook open beside her. That afternoon, something shifted. The yearling, still weak but stronger than before, got to his feet without help and nuzzled her outstretched palm. Elena laughed. The sound sharpened the stillness. The mare watched. Then, after a long moment, stepped closer. Without warning, she lowered her head and rested it gently on Elena's shoulder. It was just a moment, the barest brush of trust, but it was enough. Elena felt something inside her break and heal at once. She closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the mare's breath and the soft press of her head remind her of the world outside her pain. When the mare stepped back, Elena reached for her camera, hands trembling. She took a single photograph, herself, the mare's head on her shoulder, the yearling at her feet. Later she would realize this was the first time in years she had wanted to be in a picture. That night, Elena sat in the darkness, listening to the horses' steady breathing. She spoke to them in whispers, telling them things she hadn't told anyone since she left her old life behind, about the little girl in Kabul, about the loneliness of running, about the guilt she carried every day. She didn't know if the horses understood, but they listened better than most people ever had. When she finally fell asleep, it was with a sense of peace she had not known in a long, long time. In the morning, the storm had passed. Sunlight spilled through the cracks in the garage door, painting gold streaks across the floor. The mare stood at the threshold, nose lifted to the scent of fresh air, ears pricked forward. Elena smiled, heart aching with hope and fear. She knew their time together was coming to an end, but as she watched the mare and yearling greet the new day, she understood. She was no longer just their caretaker, and they were no longer just her guests. For a few brief, blindingly beautiful days, they had saved each other. Sunrise on the fourth day brought a world transformed. The blizzard's fury had finally broken, and outside the mountains shimmered under an ocean of snow so blinding it hurt Elena's eyes. Icicles hung like daggers from the eaves. Every branch, every stone, every inch of earth was blanketed, muffling sound and making her small corner of the bitter roots feel even more remote. Yet the storm's passing also brought relief. The air was so clean and sharp, it felt new. Elena stepped outside for the first time in days, her boots sinking nearly to her knees in the drifts. She scanned the tree line for signs of movement. No birds, no deer, not even a squirrel. It was just her, the wild horses, and the hush that follows catastrophe. In the garage, the yearling managed to stand on all four legs, looking steadier. The mare, her protector and anchor, watched Elena with an almost regal calm, as if she sensed a change was coming. While Elena fed the yearling small bites of apple and stroked the mare's neck, she thought about what to do next. The wound was healing, but she was no vet. She worried about infection and about what might come next for these horses. As if on cue, she heard a distant engine, a low, steady growl coming from the valley. Her first thought was that it was a rescue team, maybe even the ranger station finally checking on her after the storm. But what she saw instead was a battered Jeep bumping up the snowy track toward her cabin, a cloud of powder trailing behind. It looked out of place, like a relic from another world. When it stopped, a tall man climbed out, bundled in a heavy parka with a stethoscope poking out of one pocket and binoculars around his neck. He moved with purpose, but paused to wave as he approached. "Hey!" he called, voice echoing in the crystalline air. "You Elena Rivera?" Elena nodded, her guard up out of habit, but curious. "That's me." "You with the Forest Service?" "Not quite. Marcus Kwan, wildlife vet." He offered a gloved hand, his brown eyes warm and alert, scanning the property, even as they spoke. "Heard someone spotted a stray Mustang herd near the South Trail before the storm hit. I've been tracking their movement for weeks. With the weather, I figured they might take shelter near the cabins." Elena's shoulders dropped, a wave of relief breaking through her caution. "You came looking for them?" "And to check on folks up here. Bitterroot winters aren't gentle. I figured someone might need help after all that." He gestured toward the garage. "Saw hoofprints in the snow. You got company?" She hesitated for a beat, then nodded. "2 mustangs. One's just a yearling. Hurt pretty bad." Marcus's expression changed instantly. Focused, professional. He asked for details as they walked to the garage, and Elena found herself recounting everything. The night she found them, the wound, the makeshift bandaging, the endless days trapped together. Inside, the horses tensed at the stranger, the mare shifting to stand between Marcus and the foal. He spoke in a low, soothing tone, moving slowly, giving the animals time to scent him. "That's right, girl. I'm just here to check on you." He knelt, eyes scanning the mare's strong build and distinctive markings. "Well, This is Ashen, isn't it?" Elena blinked. "You know her?" "Sure do. Ashen's a bit of a legend with the Rangers, lead mare of the Ridgeway herd, one of the most resilient we've got up here. She's famous for protecting orphans, especially when something happens to their mothers." His gaze softened. "Never thought I'd see her up close like this. She's got a reputation. Loyal to a fault, but wary as a hawk." He checked the yearling's leg with practiced hands, working carefully so as not to startle the foal. "You did good work here," he said quietly. "Not many people would have known how to treat a wound like this out in the wild." Elena let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "I wasn't sure I was helping. Honestly. Just did what I remembered from my field days." Marcus glanced up, eyebrow raised. "Field medic?" "War photographer," she replied, her voice dried. But you pick up a lot when you spend enough time around chaos." He nodded, saying nothing more. The silence that followed felt comfortable, filled with the quiet respect of people who'd seen too much. When Marcus finished his examination, he looked Elena in the eye. Ashen's herd has likely moved on. If she and this yearling don't rejoin them soon, she'll lose her place. Wild horses can't afford to wait. Herd hierarchy is everything. Elena's stomach twisted. "So, what do we do?" He leaned back on his heels, thoughtful. The yearling's got a fighting chance, thanks to you, but the longer they stay, the harder it'll be for them to survive on their own. If you're willing, we can try to guide them back toward the ranger station. We've got tracking tags on our old herd, so I know roughly where they might be sheltering. Ashen shifted restlessly, as if she sensed the conversation was about her. Marcus gave her a long, measured look. She's smart. She'll know when it's time to go. But we have to be careful. If we spook her, she might run, and the foal isn't ready for that. Elena looked at Ashen, seeing the fatigue and weariness in her powerful frame. She reached out, letting the mare sniff her hand. She trusted me when she had no reason to, she murmured, almost to herself. I owe her the same. Marcus nodded. She trusts you now. That's rare. I've spent my life around wild horses, and you don't see that every day. They spent the rest of the afternoon preparing for what lay ahead. Marcus helped Elena fashion a makeshift sled from an old wooden pallet and some rope so the yearling wouldn't have to walk the whole way. They double-checked the supplies, thermal blankets, more antiseptic, a few precious apples and carrots to keep the horses calm. Marcus shared stories as they worked, how Ashen once led her herd through a wildfire, refusing to abandon an orphaned colt. How wild horses recognized people who showed them respect, and how easily trust could be broken if mishandled. Elena listened, feeling the strange, bittersweet pull of belonging to a moment bigger than herself. As dust settled over the mountains, the plan took shape. They would wait for the weather to clear just a little more, then set out for the ranger station in hopes of reconnecting Ashen and the yearling with their herd. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing worth doing ever was. But for the first time in years, Elena felt like she was part of a story she wanted to see through, not just document and escape from. When Marcus left to sleep in his Jeep, Elena sat alone in the garage for a long time, the mare's eyes meeting hers across the shadows. Don't worry, she whispered. You've come this far. I'm not letting you down now. And for a moment, in the hush of the winter night, Elena realized she was talking to herself, as much as to the horse, two survivors, both daring to hope that loyalty and courage might still carry them home. The night after Marcus arrived felt different, brighter somehow, as if just having a plan gave the storm's aftermath less power over them. Elena still lay awake, unable to fully surrender to sleep, listening to the distant wind and the slow, deep breaths of the horses in the garage. Every few hours she checked on the yearling, fearing some setback, some sign the wound had worsened, but when she found him standing beside Ashen, eyes half closed and coat flecked with bits of straw, hope bloomed quietly inside her. By morning, the clouds had cleared enough for the world to emerge in blue and gold. Snowdrifts sparkled in the sunlight, and the air was so crisp it stung Elena's lungs as she stepped outside. She found Marcus already awake, writing in a weathered field notebook by the hood of his Jeep. Looks like we might catch a break today, he said, glancing up, his breath steaming in the cold. Inside the garage, Ashen stood alert. The yearling seemed eager, shifting his weight, his injured leg trembling but holding steady. Elena offered him a few carrot slices, smiling as he crunched them. That's my brave boy, she murmured. Ashen watched every movement, protective but no longer tense, almost as if she knew what was coming. Elena's mind was a swirl of doubt and longing. She'd nursed these horses through a storm that could have killed them. She'd felt the pulse of trust, that silent bond, as Ashen allowed her to step so close to treat her wounded companion. In some ways, the isolation and the storm had been a gift. 3 days suspended outside time, where pain and healing could coexist. But now, with the sky clearing and Marcus planning the route to the ranger station, she faced a choice she'd been dreading, to hold on or to let go. Marcus re-entered the garage, carrying supplies, blankets, extra rope, a bottle of antibiotics. He knelt beside the yearling, examining the leg with gentle hands. He's healing well, but he's still weak. We'll need to keep him warm and keep the wound clean all the way to base. Marcus looked up at Elena, understanding in his eyes. This won't be easy on any of us, especially Ashen. But it's their only chance. Elena nodded, forcing a small smile. I know. It's just... She trailed off, not trusting her voice. Marcus gave her a moment, then spoke softly. You saved them, Elena. But if we keep them here, they lose everything that makes them wild. Ashen's already been away from her herd too long. Wild horses survive by belonging to each other. We can't be her herd. Not forever. That simple truth struck Elena harder than she expected. The mare had trusted her, leaned on her for safety, just as Elena had leaned on the silent company of these horses to soothe her own wounds. To let them go felt like reopening every scar she'd tried to heal with solitude. As they prepared for the journey, Elena noticed the yearling shivering more than usual. His breaths came fast, and his nose felt hot beneath her hand. Panic lanced through her. Had she missed an infection? Had she pushed him too far? Marcus checked the foal's temperature, his face tight with concern. He's running a fever. It could be stress, or the wound might be getting infected. Elena's chest clenched. What do we do? Marcus drew a syringe from his kit, filled it with antibiotics, and injected it carefully. We give him a fighting chance. If he can rest for a few hours, the fever might break. He met Elena's eyes. This is the moment. If he doesn't rally, we'll have to call the Rangers and see if they can medevac him out. But if he can stand and eat by afternoon, we move. The hours crawled. Elena barely left the foal's side, wiping his forehead, whispering encouragement, feeding him water with a syringe. Ashen stood close, sometimes nuzzling Elena's arm, sometimes resting her head on the yearling's back as if willing her strength into him. Every time Elena's hope flickered, the mare's calm presence steadied her. By early afternoon, as light streamed through the garage window, the yearling's breathing slowed. His fever broke, and he reached for the apple Elena held out, taking slow, tentative bites. Relief flooded her, so overwhelming she had to blink away tears. Marcus grinned. He's a fighter. They both are. The garage filled with a sense of possibility. But as they began to harness the sled for the journey, Elena was hit by the ache of parting. She stroked Ashen's mane, burying her face in the coarse hair, inhaling the scent of wild grass and winter. I wish you could stay, she whispered, but I know you don't belong here. I'd only be holding you back. Ashen stood perfectly still, her breath warm against Elena's cheek. It wasn't goodbye. Not really. More a promise to honor what had passed between them. Marcus and Elena loaded the yearling gently onto the sled, wrapping him in blankets, and secured Ashen with a loose lead. The mare accepted it without resistance, as if she understood this was part of her duty. The moment came quickly. Elena stood with her gloved hand resting on Ashen's shoulder, eyes shining. If loving them means letting go, then I owe them that much, she murmured, repeating words she'd said long ago to a friend on another continent, in another kind of storm. They stepped out into the cold, snow crunching underfoot, the silence vast and reverent. The cabin behind them looked smaller than ever, almost weightless in the face of all that open sky. Elena led the way, Marcus following with the sled, the horses moving between them. She looked back once at the garage, the place where fear had given way to trust, and where loneliness had found a quiet companion. The journey ahead was uncertain, the world was still dangerous, the wild as unforgiving as ever. But for the first time in years, Elena felt a strange, fierce hope that maybe, just maybe, healing wasn't about holding on. Maybe it was about loving enough to let go, and trusting that the wild, like life, sometimes gave back more than it took. The sun set behind the mountains, casting the snowfields in amber and violet. As they made their slow way down the trail, Ashen's head remained high, the yearling tucked close, and Elena, her heart raw but open, walked beside them, determined to see them safely home, wherever that would be. The world outside the cabin was blinding, pure, and brutal. Drifts of snow as tall as Elena's chest lined the path. The sled Marcus and Elena had rigged for the yearling creaked as they eased it into motion. Marcus guiding from behind while Elena led Ashen, who kept watchful pace beside the sled. The sky was an enormous blue dome, clouds like faded brushstrokes racing overhead. But the sun's warmth did little to cut the cold that seeped into their bones. Elena had known this wouldn't be easy. The path to the ranger station wound up and down frozen ridges, over open meadows where the snow threatened to swallow their feet, and through thickets of ice-sheathed willows that scratched at their legs. Each step was a test for Ashen's patience, for the yearling's fragile strength, for Elena's resolve to see this through, even as her heart clenched with every mile that drew them away from the home they'd shared, brief as it was. The horses accepted the pace without protest. Ashen moved like a sentinel, ears flicking at every distant crack or bird call, her presence giving the yearling the courage to go on. The yearling rested in the sled, blanketed and bundled, his eyes following Elena's every movement. Marcus kept a hand on the rope, calling out gentle encouragement and quietly checking the foal's wound every time they stopped for breath. If progress was slow, the sled stuck in deep drifts, forcing Elena and Marcus to dig and push with numb fingers. There were moments when Elena's lungs burned and her arms ached so badly she wanted to collapse, but she pushed forward, thinking of the mare's unwavering loyalty and the yearling's will to live. There was no room for failure, not now, not after coming this far. As they reached the edge of a frozen ridge, the wind picked up, driving loose snow into their faces. Marcus checked his GPS, frowning. "We're not far from the south trail, but this whiteout's coming in fast. If we try to keep going, we'll risk losing our way. And the temperature's dropping again." Elena surveyed the horizon. The world beyond the ridge blurred, turning featureless and gray. Ashen wickered, shifting uneasily as the wind howled louder, and the yearling shivered beneath his blankets. Marcus pointed toward a pile of rocks, a shallow cave partly hidden by a fallen pine. "We need shelter. If the storm gets worse, we'll have to wait it out." Together, they coaxed Ashen and the sled to the cave, its mouth just big enough to fit them all. The inside smelled of earth and old pine. Elena gathered fallen branches and used a portable stove to brew a cup of instant coffee, the warmth a small comfort as they all huddled close. Elena and Marcus sitting shoulder to shoulder, Ashen standing guard at the entrance, the yearling curled between them. Outside, the wind screamed, rattling branches and sending swirls of snow past the cave's mouth. Inside, the silence was heavy, broken only by the occasional stamping of Ashen's hooves and the soft snort of the yearling as he nuzzled into Elena's lap for warmth. For a long time, no one spoke. Marcus scribbled notes in his book, checking the foal's wound by the light of his headlamp, while Elena stared into the dark, her thoughts spinning with memories. In this cold, narrow space, it felt as if the world had narrowed to just the four of them, survivors brought together by chance and necessity. After a while, Marcus broke the silence. "You know," he said softly, "it takes a lot for a wild mustang to trust a person, especially a mare like Ashen. She doesn't give her loyalty lightly." Elena hugged her knees, watching the slow rise and fall of the yearling's sides. "She didn't have a choice. Neither did I." Marcus looked at her, not pushing, but waiting. Elena met his gaze and saw a question there, one she'd been running from for years. She took a shaky breath, the words catching in her throat. "There was a girl," she said, staring at her hands. "Kabul, years ago. I was working on a photo essay about children in conflict zones. Thought if I just told the story, people would care. Maybe they'd help." The wind howled outside, but inside, everything was still. Ashen turned her head, fixing Elena with her deep, ancient gaze. "I tried to save her." Elena went on, voice barely above a whisper. "She was just a kid, maybe 7, clutching this filthy doll, bleeding from a shrapnel wound. I dropped my camera, tried to stop the bleeding. But she looked up at me. She knew I couldn't save her. I saw it in her eyes." Marcus listened, quiet and open, not interrupting. "I stayed with her until she was gone. And after that," Elena swallowed, shaking, "I couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't take pictures. Couldn't even talk about it. So I ran. Came out here to forget. To disappear." The silence stretched, and Marcus put a hand on her shoulder. Not heavy, just enough to say he understood. "You didn't run, Elena. You survived. Sometimes that's all you can do. Elena let the tears come, silent and hot, streaking down her cheeks. For the first time, she didn't try to hide. Ashen pressed close, her breath warm against Elena's hair, and the yearling blinked up at her with wide, trusting eyes. "You're not the only one who's lost something," Marcus said gently. "Ashen's had to lead her herd through wildfires, storms, and poachers. She's seen foals die. But she keeps going. That's what it means to be wild. And to love." Elena smiled through her tears, feeling something fragile and new unfolding inside her. "I thought I was done with saving anyone, but maybe I needed someone to save me too." The cave felt safer now, the warmth of the horses and Marcus beside her easing the weight she'd carried for so long. When the whiteout finally passed and the stars came out, Marcus checked the GPS again. "We'll head for base camp at first light. Should be clear from here on out." Elena nodded, her voice steadier. "Thank you, Marcus, for all of it." He smiled, and Ashen whickered softly, as if agreeing. That night, as Elena drifted into sleep, she felt the yearling's head on her lap, and Ashen's flank pressed close beside her. For the first time in years, she didn't dream of war or loss, but of snow falling gently on wild horses and the silent, enduring bond that held them all together. Dawn broke clear and bitterly cold. In the east, sunlight gilded the mountain peaks, spilling gold across a world made pristine by snow and silence. For a moment, as Elena blinked sleep from her eyes, she forgot where she was, forgot the cave, the cold, the ache in her muscles. All she knew was a sense of peace, a hush that stretched from her heart to the glowing horizon. Then Ashen stirred beside her, shaking frost from her mane, and the yearling nuzzled her knee. Marcus, already awake, nodded to her. "Looks like we made it through the worst," he said quietly. "Let's finish this." They packed quickly. Elena tucked her notebook and camera back into her pack, fingers stiff but determined. Marcus checked the yearling's wound. The swelling was down, the leg stronger. "He's ready," Marcus said, offering the foal a gentle pat. "You did good, kid." They stepped out into the dazzling morning. Ashen moved ahead, head high, nostrils flaring at the scents on the breeze. Pine, melting snow, the faintest whiff of other horses far off. Elena felt a surge of pride at the mare's resilience, her instinctive leadership. She thought of all Ashen had endured to bring the yearling this far, of all she'd risked for the sake of a foal who wasn't even hers by blood. That kind of loyalty was something Elena recognized, deep in her bones. The final stretch to base camp was slow but steady. The snow was softer now, yielding under their boots and hooves. The yearling rode in the sled, bright-eyed and curious, his ears swiveling at every strange sound. Marcus led the way, checking the GPS and marking their progress on a battered map. Elena walked beside Ashen, offering encouragement, her own breath visible in the icy air. Around noon, the wind shifted, carrying voices and the sharp bark of a radio. Marcus signaled for them to pause. Through the trees, the outline of a ranger station appeared. Low log buildings ringed by snowmobiles and bundled-up staff. Elena's heart pounded with relief and apprehension. The moment they'd prepared for was here. The base camp staff sprang into action as soon as they saw the group emerge from the woods. A young vet named Lauren and a pair of wildlife techs rushed forward, eyes wide as they took in Ashen and the yearling. "You actually did it," Lauren breathed, her gloved hands reaching for the sled's harness. "We were worried sick. Thought the storm would keep you snowed in for a week." Marcus exchanged quick updates with the team, describing the yearling's injury and Ashen's extraordinary guardianship. Elena stood a little apart, watching as the professionals set to work. They moved with quiet efficiency, lifting the yearling from the sled and settling him onto a makeshift gurney. Lauren examined the leg, nodding approval. "Clean work. Whoever did this knows their stuff." Elena felt a strange pang of pride and loss mingled together. She glanced at Ashen, who stood in the circle of strangers, muscles tense and eyes wary, but not panicked. The mare's gaze never left the yearling. As the foal was led inside for further treatment, Ashen shifted her weight, nostrils flaring, clearly struggling with the instinct to follow. Elena knelt beside her, whispering softly, "They've got him now. You did your part. You got him here." The words were meant for Ashen, but as she spoke them, Elena realized they were meant for herself as well. She had done what she could, offered shelter, care, protection. Now, she had to let others carry it forward. The staff made room in one of the barns for Ashen, giving her hay and water and space to rest. Elena stayed with her, sitting in the straw, fingers buried in the horse's mane. The bond between them was silent, stitched together by hardship and the long, cold nights they'd survived together. After an hour, Lauren returned, face open and hopeful. "He'll be all right," she said. "He needs rest and antibiotics. But you did everything right." Relief crashed over Elena, so intense it nearly buckled her knees. She stood slowly, stroking Ashen's neck, savoring the last moments of their connection. As evening approached, Marcus found her by the barn. He was smiling, tired but triumphant. "The herd's been tracked just north of here, across the open range. Once the yearling is cleared, we'll rejoin them. Ashen can go back where she belongs." Elena nodded, but tears stung her eyes. "I know. That's what's best." Together they watched the sunset turn the sky to violet and gold. The world felt larger somehow, more open, full of possibility and ache. As darkness fell, Elena stood outside the barn and watched the staff bustle around the base camp, their laughter and chatter rising into the night. For the first time in years, she felt herself slipping from the margins of her own life. She was present, rooted, a part of something that mattered. Later, after the others had gone in for dinner, Elena returned to Ashen's side. She knelt, her cheek pressed to the horse's shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered, "for trusting me, for letting me help." Ashen turned, meeting Elena's gaze. In the dim light, her eyes glowed, wild, ancient, forgiving. Elena felt the moment deepen. She knew Ashen would leave soon, would vanish into the wild, with her herd, her purpose renewed. And Elena, too, would have to move forward, carrying this connection as proof that healing was possible, even after the fiercest storms. She rose slowly, brushing snow from her knees. Ashen watched her, then turned toward the trees, pausing to look back just once. A silent goodbye, weighted with more meaning than words could hold. Inside the barn, the yearling was already asleep, safe and warm. Elena lingered outside a while longer, letting the silence settle around her, feeling the edges of grief and gratitude blur. She knew she would never forget this winter, this blizzard, this fragile, ordinary miracle. The wild had given her back to herself. Now it was time to let go. Winter loosened its grip slowly in the bitterroots. Weeks slipped by, bringing longer days in the steady drip of melting snow from cabin roofs. At the ranger station, the mustangs recovered beneath the watchful eyes of the wildlife staff, and Elena found herself returning day after day, never quite ready to leave. She wasn't sure what held her there. Perhaps it was the unfinished story, or perhaps she simply couldn't let go. She filled her notebook with details, the yearling's strength returning, Ashen's dark mane glossy and untamed, the shifting moods of the staff as they waited for the right moment to bring the horses back to their wild home. Marcus stopped by each day, sometimes sharing a cup of bad coffee or news about the herd's movement. He never pushed Elena to talk, but she found herself telling him more than she expected. About the storm, her past, the way she'd felt as Ashen trusted her in that little garage. Marcus listened, nodding, offering gentle reassurance. "The wild gives, and it takes," he said one afternoon as they watched the yearling graze on early spring grass. "But sometimes it gives us back to ourselves." When the call finally came, a crackling radio message from the North Hills, there was a buzz of excitement throughout the camp. Rangers had spotted Ashen's herd grazing in a thawed valley just where Marcus had predicted. The timing was perfect. The yearling's wound was fully healed, and both horses were fit and restless, eager for the open spaces beyond the fence. The official re-release was set for a mild Saturday in April. News traveled quickly. Reporters, conservationists, and local volunteers wanted to attend to witness the rare return of 2 wild horses to their family. The station's director asked Elena if she'd like to speak, to stand in front of the cameras and tell her story, but she declined. This wasn't her victory. It belonged to Ashen, the yearling, and the land itself. Instead, on the morning of the release, Elena slipped away from the main group. She wore her old field jacket and carried her camera, the lens polished and batteries fresh. She found a quiet spot behind the tree line overlooking the open meadow where sunlight melted patches of snow into shining pools and a ribbon of icy creek ran through the grass. She watched as the staff led Ashen and the yearling from the barn, both horses alert, nostrils flaring, ears flicking toward the distant sounds of their herd. The air was electric with anticipation. Elena's heart thudded as she pressed the camera to her eye, her finger trembling on the shutter. There was a brief moment of ceremony. A ranger said a few words about resilience and hope, while a wildlife vet checked the yearling one last time. Then, the gates were drawn open. For a heartbeat, everything went still. Ashen stood with her head high, muscles rippling, the yearling pressed to her side. The world seemed to hold its breath. Ashen stepped forward, tentative at first, then with gathering speed. She called out, a sharp, wild whinny that echoed through the meadow. From the distant hills, the answer came, a chorus of mustangs, voices strong and haunting. The yearling hesitated, glancing back at the humans, then followed Ashen into the open. Elena's camera clicked almost without her thinking. She tracked the movement, the blur of black and gray against the green and gold of new grass. Ashen paused once, halfway across the field, and turned. Even at a distance, Elena saw her lock eyes. Not with the crowd, but directly at her, hidden beyond the tree line. In that gaze, Elena felt everything: gratitude, recognition, and the untamed promise of freedom. She lowered her camera, unable to breathe for a moment. Ashen lingered, then tossed her mane and loped away, the yearling at her side. As the herd greeted the returning pair, the entire meadow erupted with movement and sound, snorts, stamps, the thunder of hooves against thawed earth. Ashen, and the yearling disappeared into a tide of wild bodies, embraced by family, by home, by the life they were born to. The crowd at the ranger station cheered, but Elena stayed in her quiet shadow, watching until the horses vanished into the far hills, their coats gleaming in the April sun. She felt both emptiness and fullness at once, a paradox she didn't try to resolve. The world was wide enough for both. She stayed a while longer, letting herself breathe in the smell of pine and mud, the lingering warmth of the sun. Then she packed her camera and notebook, shoulders lighter than they'd been in years. Walking back along the trail, she stopped once to look over her shoulder. The meadow was empty now, the snow melting into the grass. But she swore she could still hear Ashen's call, feel the thrum of hooves through the ground. She whispered, "Thank you," to the wind, not sure if she was speaking to the horses or the wild itself. Later, back at her cabin, Elena developed her photos in the makeshift darkroom she'd set up years ago and never used. She pinned one to the wall above her desk. Ashen and the yearling running free, framed by sunlit snow. Beneath it, she scribbled a single line in her notebook. Sometimes, all you can do is let go and trust that love knows where to run. That night, as she lay in bed, the world outside was alive with spring, branches creaking, rivers running, the hush and promise of another beginning. Elena closed her eyes and felt the wild in her blood, no longer a thing to run from, but a place she could finally call home. The days that followed the Mustang's release moved gently, as if time itself was catching its breath. The snow melted, turning the forest floor to thick, fragrant mud. Buds unfurled on the branches, and wild crocuses pushed their way through last year's leaves. For the first time in months, Elena let herself slow down and simply exist, not as a caretaker or a woman running from her past, but as someone present, truly present, in the rhythm of the Bitterroots. She spent her mornings walking the trails near her cabin, boots squelching through the damp earth, breathing in the green hush of the trees. The scars of the winter storm were everywhere, broken branches, half-collapsed drifts lingering in the shade. But so was renewal. A pair of deer picked their way across the creek. Birds darted from branch to branch, their songs bright and insistent. Sometimes Elena would pause and look up at the pale sky, feeling the light on her face, and think, I'm still here. I made it through. Inside, her cabin felt different too. The silence, once suffocating, had softened. She kept the garage swept and clean, half expecting to find a wild mane or set of hoofprints waiting for her in the straw. But what she found instead was a new steadiness, an absence of dread, a sense that she was finally allowed to feel joy again. On her wall, just above her writing desk, hung the photograph she'd taken in the storm, the yearling leaning into Ashen, snow falling around them, their breath mingling in the icy air. Beneath it, another image, the two horses running together, wild and unbroken, fading into the spring-bright hills. Elena sometimes sat for hours with her camera and notebook, writing what she remembered, how Ashen's gaze had pierced through her isolation, how the yearling had trusted her with its pain, how the rhythm of feeding, cleaning, and waiting had gradually thawed the frost around her heart. Each word, each memory, felt less like a wound and more like a gift. One afternoon, as a spring storm passed over the valley, Elena sat on her porch and listened to the thunder. She thought of the blizzard's roar, of the terror and the hope tangled together in that garage. She wondered where Ashen and her herd were now, maybe grazing in a high meadow, or drinking from a melted creek, the yearling strong at her side. She missed them fiercely. But it was not the sharp ache of loss anymore. It was gratitude. It was love. Unpossessive and wide as the mountains. A week after the release, Elena received a package from the ranger station. Inside was a thank you note from Lauren, a framed copy of the official herd photo, and a small leather tag, one of the old tracking markers, removed from Ashen before she returned to the wild. Elena ran her thumb over the worn leather, smiling, then hung it from a nail beside her photographs. It was a symbol, she decided. Not of ownership, but of having been part of something being real. One evening, as the sun burned low and gold over the hills, Elena loaded her camera and hiked to the edge of the forest. She stood beneath the wind-tossed pines, waiting as shadows lengthened across the clearing. She knew the mustangs were out there, free, unseen, and yet somehow closer than ever. She didn't expect a reunion. That wasn't how the wild worked. Instead, she closed her eyes and listened to the hush, to the heartbeat of the land itself. In that quiet, she finally understood. Healing didn't come from erasing the past or from shutting out the world. It came from staying present, from bearing witness, from opening herself up to trust, even when it hurt. As dusk deepened, Elena lifted her camera and took one last photo. The empty field, the soft light, the memory of hooves pressed into the mud. She returned home, pinned the image beside the others, and wrote in her notebook, "The wild never promised healing, but it gave me something to hold on to, and in that blizzard, I learned how to listen again." That night, as rain tapped against the windows, Elena sat by the fire and recorded a voice memo for herself. A habit from her old life she hadn't tried in years. Her voice was steady, a little raw, but sure. Trust isn't spoken, it's shown. We don't always rescue animals. Sometimes they rescue us. And sometimes healing begins not with words, but with watching, waiting, and staying present. She ended the recording, feeling lighter than she had in a long time. It was the story she wished someone had told her years ago, that you don't have to be whole to help another soul heal. That sometimes showing up cold, afraid, uncertain is enough. That in the silence, in the small acts of care, you can find your way back. As the fire burned low, Elena sent a message to Marcus, a simple thank you for everything he'd done. She knew their paths would cross again, perhaps in another emergency. Or maybe over coffee at the ranger station, swapping stories as the wild rolled on outside. For now, though, she was content to watch the flames and let the memories settle. Outside, the storm had faded, replaced by the chorus of frogs and the rush of thawed streams. Inside, the wild was still with her. In every quiet moment, every heartbeat, every photograph that spoke of trust, endurance, and the slow, patient return to life. Trust isn't spoken, it's shown. We don't always rescue animals. Sometimes they rescue us. And sometimes the healing begins not with words, but with watching, waiting, and staying present. Like if you've ever felt seen by an animal. Share if you believe connection can come from silence. Yeah. Subscribe for more true stories that show us what the wild remembers.